Kelly, welcome to the show. Brushing your hair at the very beginning. You got it. You got this. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to recap it for you. So my name's Dr. Kelly Makino. I am the VP of People and Culture for Wurzak Hotel Group. We are a hotel management company, owner and operator of 10, soon to be 11 hotels in Philly, Fort Lauderdale, and the DC area. Today, I'm actually on site in Reston, Virginia, visiting our beautiful, talking to you. So I've been in HR for probably, oh my gosh, 15 years. And prior to that, funny enough, I was a MSW. I was a counselor. So I, as you can probably guess, use those skills every day. And I'm responsible for the culture, for the people oriented programming, as well as compliance and payroll and a few of the other less fun things for the organization. But I definitely enjoy every minute of it. HR is a fabulous place. Oh, and forgot to mention, I have the doctorate is in leadership development. So I'm super passionate about homegrowing heroes in our organization and making sure that people have a workplace that they can really blossom at and enjoy a job that gives them purpose and fuels their souls. So that's me in a nutshell.
That is awesome. And you're definitely the most qualified person I've ever had in the podcast. Definitely got the most strings to your bow, or whatever the phrase is. Your background and your sort of experience in sort of culture and leadership, I think, is definitely unparalleled on the podcast. But also, I think, like, just on paper, the Wurzak Group are like, must be very lucky to have you. I think when we think about like leadership, I think we should just dive right into leadership.
Let's do
Let's talk leadership. Let's talk hospitality. What makes a great leader in hospitality? Go.
Core, I'd say this. If a leader gives to the people that report to them the same level of relationship management skills that they give to the guests that they serve, they will be a great leader. It
Okay.
might manifest
So,
differently,
yeah.
but
Okay. Give some color there because, for example, I walk into a hotel and GM comes up and he's, Mr. Mann, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for coming to our hotel. We got all these extra rewards. You're going to get late checkout tomorrow. Oh my God, you're so nice. Thank you. And would he speak like that to the rest of the team? Is that what you're saying? That's as well, treat the guests,
ah,
but also treat the staff. Is
great.
that what you're getting at there or what?
So let's dig down a click level.
Yeah.
Let's dig down a click on that one. So the goal of that interaction is to have the GM meet this person as they're coming in the front door, make them feel instantly welcome, make them feel emotionally attached to the brand, make them feel like this is a home away from home, right?
Yeah.
And that GM interacts with the guest on the level that is both budgetarily appropriate, because we're not going to give away the farm, right? And also in a way that really connects in a genuine and authentic level with that guest, right? If the leaders are interacting with the people that they lead on the same level and creating that same connection, making the ordinary extraordinary, showing the behavior that they want that person to receive, then that is the thing where I'm saying we want to give each other the same level of guest service that we are giving to the people who stay at the hotel. It doesn't mean that we're going to give them whatever they want, right?
Yeah.
But we're going to make them feel happy, connected, and ready to come back.
And how does that manifest itself in a material way?
You mean from like the management procedures, or tell me what you mean by
Well,
material way?
what I mean by material is like, how does that actually happen? You know what I mean? It's so you can design programs for learning and leadership, and then what you
Mhm.
want is like the implementation of them and people to try them. And then how do you measure what is the material impact of that kind of initiative?
Ooh, great question. There's three things baked in there. So first, let's say, what is the manifestation of that leadership? And then how do we ensure that the leadership program is really doing its thing, and then how do we measure it? There's kind of three. So I'll tease
I
those
ask
three
I
things
ask
apart.
really annoying questions, I know.
No, they're great questions. They're great questions. So the first thing I think for a really great leadership, the first thing you have to do is pretend like you're a painter. And when a great painter is wanting to recreate a scene, they forget what they're looking at. They don't see violets and they don't see sky and they don't see dirt. They see blues and purples and greens and browns, and they just paint what's in front of them. So we have to let go of the idea of leadership and look at what are the behaviors that make a great leader, right? So in order to materially teach leadership, we're just looking at how do we teach certain clusters of behavioral competencies, relationship management, negotiation, mediation, emotional control, all of those things that make a great leader. So you can do that for a GM level, you can do that for the front desk, you can do that for a line cook. But what we're really focusing on is building those emotional intelligence skills.
Okay.
Okay. So how do you do that? It's a social learning process. So we can't just plunk somebody down in a conference room and say, here's a case study, go at it, and expect them to be able to use those skills. So in order to be able to really get it going, we need to get people into situations where they can grow under a really good mentor that's modeling and teaching those skills like with like real world impactful type of experiences, right? So think of it in terms of when we teach a counselor how to be a counselor, we have somebody observe them, but they go and they do the counseling session, right? So to teach service recovery, like for an upset guest, we're going to have like a good pregame with that front desk manager. We're going to go, we're going to tell them, all right, this is what we want you to go do. Now go calm the guest down. Here's your talking points. They go, they calm the guest down. They come back and the mentor says, how did it go? What would you change? What did you like? How effective did you feel like it was? That's the learning process. So a really good leadership development program is going to give them the tools that they need on the management aspect, but also teach them all of those behavioral skills that we need paired up with good mentors, paired up with good buddies. And then how do we measure the impact of that? It's going to show up in things like our P&L. It's going to show up in attendance. It's going to show up in so many different areas where you're going to, whenever we're measuring organizational effectiveness, a lot of that kind of stuff. Because good leaders, the more skilled a leader is, the more they can get people to do what they don't want to do. So that's going to mean they're cleaning rooms more efficiently, that they are focusing on getting their compliance training in when they're supposed to. We're going to be getting reports more often and on a regular
Yeah.
cadence. All of that adds up to better P&L, better flow through. So it depends. That was a really long answer to your question.
No, I think like there's this the traditional like our leaders born or made, right? Is it like from a life of experience that informs the behavior of today? And like what are the sort of programs and processes that companies can actually put in place to actually not turn somebody into Dwight Eisenhower, but can certainly get you close to understanding what it takes to perform as a leader. Now, because again, can somebody turn into or perform as a leader? I guess is probably like even the way I've even articulated that myself. I'm like trying to figure out how it works, but I think it almost is, and we spoke about this before, is it a behavioral science? You know what I mean? Is leadership something like a behavioral science? I guess seeing as you're the most educated person on the call, I will defer that question to you and get your 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I think it definitely mimics a behavioral science in some ways. A lot of what we want our leaders to do are the same things that a really good counselor or a really good teacher would do. It's the same skills in a different manifestation. It's coaching, it helping people change their behavior, it's keeping people motivated. So if we can teach leadership the same way that we can teach people learning other behavioral sciences like counseling and teaching,
Yeah.
then that is the way that people have found the most success with it. And there's some organizations that have actually done that. Google's a good example. The way they run their organizational leadership development programs is excellent. A couple of the larger consultancy firms take a similar view. But I do think that if we focus on the way we want our leaders to act versus like building a leader, it winds up going a lot faster because really people are just mirror images of the culture that they're in. So if we're
Yes.
embedding the behaviors that we want to see in an accountable way into our culture, then everybody's going to have to get on board, right?
So again, but that demands good leadership in and of itself, because what you want is your sort of senior leadership, so to speak, to live, breathe, and die by the norms and behaviors that they want to impress upon the rest of the organization. And so I guess it's interesting for you because what you've been in your role like a year. I guess it's almost like a challenge to them to get on board with like this leadership ideology to then impress upon the rest of the organization, which presents a challenge for you.
Totally agree. One thing that we were talking about before that I really think you hit the nail on the head on is that it's all about finding a tipping point in the culture and in the organization to ensure that we're moving in the direction that we want to. We're not going to get it perfect every day, and we're not going to be able to embed it all the way into the culture across every group. That's not necessarily something that's probably going to happen, right? But we can get most of it. And the important thing is to normalize it, get that tipping point strong enough that what we're looking to see is normal. And that makes it a lot easier to hold people accountable to
Yeah.
what you want to see in management.
I guess question then, when you talk about normal as like a sort of standard, and not to be like implied that normal is bad or normal is not great, but
Yeah.
is it easier to see bad leadership than good leadership?
That's a great question. I would say bad leaders tend to be really good at covering their tracks. So
Sociopaths.
bad leaders, think about it in terms of like how many times have you been in like a situation where like just take it like to like the boyfriend girlfriend level, right? Like you've seen all the red flags, but it took it a minute. It took a minute to really for it to sink in that this is actually a pattern and it wasn't a situational thing, right? Now, if somebody is that same person with the red flags goes to work and it is just as hard for their coworkers to notice that red flag pattern as it is everyone else. And the savvier, usually the worse a leader is, the savvier they are when it comes to that kind of stuff. So, is it easier to see? Yes, in theory, but it can be really hard to pick up because, especially like when you have a situation where you've got, say, maybe a director that's not doing a good job, it will appear that the managers under them, that the people around them are the ones not doing a good job, when in fact they're
Yeah.
doing a better job, like in spite of the leader. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I guess the reason I think about it is like hospitality is unique in terms of the importance of people within the sort of brand and the experience, in a way that using Duolingo as an app on your phone, it's like, you don't know anything about the people who made the app. All you know is it's good. You know what I mean? Whereas this, like, you're interfacing with humans. And so leadership is even more important because there's so many facets to the running of the business, of which they're a part of a human chain. And
Amen.
so what separates good from great in a lot of these organizations is great people and great leaders. And a hotel's a hotel, like they're a commodity in one sense. There's like a hotel here and a hotel there. And what are you picking it for? You know what I mean? Obviously, there are experiences and everything else. But like, I'll give you an example.
But you go back for
Uh,
the relationships, right?
yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. So, like, I had a guy on the podcast, and he's the director of OpEx at Dave and Buster's, and he was like, "Look, like we're at almost 200 locations, and we're like fundamentally an arcade with food. So, there's nothing patentable about what they're doing, but they've hit 200 locations, and other people are doing 5 or 10 locations. So there isn't really a kind of competition against them. And man, it's the culture is the difference. Like how we've designed our culture, why people want to work here, why people want to stay, how we give people opportunities is really what separates it. But that entire mindset stems from a leadership perspective that like encourages people to like bring their best self forward in the workplace. So in one sense, am I conflating leadership and culture, or are they like so intertwined that great leadership would imply great culture?
Great organization are leadership incubators.
Yeah.
Everybody is doing the same thing. They all think the same way. Think about it in terms of the Ritz Carlton. If you've ever had dinner in any of their restaurants, the Ritz Carlton, their critical thinking skills of the teams are just excellent as
Yeah.
compared like the I'm afraid to name
Careful
everyone.
now.
I don't want to trash talk anybody. Like that hotel by the side of the highway that you just crash at and is completely forgettable, right? It's the people. And it has to do with the fact that they all think of themselves as leaders in a way, right? That front desk thinks of themselves, they have an ownership, they have an accountability, they think of themselves as a leader to the guest,
Yeah.
right? Like servant leadership, the concepts are very intertwined.
Yeah.
That's not an accident that that those two were put together, because heart of service will just have different manifestations. So we just want to lean in on that really hard. And so it is in the culture, like the behaviors that we want to see are in the culture. And then the way that the front line uses those skills is one way, the way that the managers use those skills are a different way. But I'm saying all of this, and I don't want you to think that we want to hire people that are going to be like robotic little clones of each
Yeah.
other when it comes to style. Like we want people to have their own style within this concept of leadership and a flair for relationships. Do you know what I mean?
I like at the end of the day, you're looking for like entrepreneurial, passionate folks that can be critical in their analysis, not critical in their analysis, but like you be able to think critically rather
Critically
about a
think. Yeah.
problem. And really fundamentally, that's what it stems from. It's like critical thinking and empathy, emotional intelligence, and trying to combine those.
Yep.
Because I
There's
mean,
this
I
cool
guess that's
concept
what's
in
yeah.
there's this cool concept in psychology called creative thinking skills, which think of it like it's like critical thinking skills, but instead of analyzing it, we're finding opportunities that didn't happen. So it's like this concept of kind of it's like a mishmash between entrepreneurial and creativity and creative critical thinking. Like you combine those things and you've got creative thinking, which it's not just like coming up with an idea or coming up with something artistic. It's like a creative way of critical thinking. That is a thing that we want everybody to have, where they're just like looking around, they're reading the room, they're spotting what people want, where they're seeing those families come in with loaded down with bags from the beach. And that mom, those kids probably want apples. Let's get some fiber into them. Let's give the mom some water. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that kind of thinking is what we really want in guest service.
Yeah, no, totally. And I guess when we think about employing like a great culture in an organization and a great culture in hospitality, I guess what kind of comes to mind here when I think about it is founder led kind of organizations will have a culture that stems from the norms and habits of the founder. They will hire like minded folks that they see something of themselves in them and groom and grow that organization. But like when you think about the inverse, which is, and it seems to be happening a lot where there's a lot of consolidation in the hotel industry. There's a lot of like groups buying other hotels, bring them in. And those organizations need a culture shift. They need to change the culture. I guess like when you think about the challenges for, yeah, I remember, and I wrote this in the notes that I sent you, but I remember you saying hiring for culture ad, not culture fit.
Mm.
And it's like when you got to go and change a culture in an organization like a hotel that you buy, it's not necessarily culture ad, it's not necessarily culture fit. So it's, what are some of the things if somebody was listening to this and they're like considering like buying a hotel or like buying a restaurant or something, like when you think about like trying to incorporate your culture in, like what are some of the steps or missteps that people should look to or avoid?
When we're looking at blending two cultures together, or when
Yeah,
you're
or like consuming one.
great question. All right, so what we would want to do is look at, say, let's see, we've got culture A, culture B. Culture A, maybe that's the hotel we're buying. Culture B is the management company coming in, right?
Yeah.
We're going to look at both of those cultures. We're going to do an assessment, a gap analysis. What are the strengths of each one? And what are the weaknesses? And are they complementary? Sometimes you can have two, because culture isn't about what is the ideal culture, what's not ideal. It's all about right fit. Like, we don't want the same culture at Amazon and the Ritz-Carlton. Like, they need to have their own flair to get done what they need to do.
Yeah.
So are the strengths of these two cultures complementary, or are they going to like butt heads? And if they're going to butt heads, how can we figure out the things that people are really passionate about, showing them that they are aligned? Now, for the areas that it's not aligned, sometimes things are polar opposites and they never will align. That's a possibility. The way you handle that is, I've written entire books about that. So it's a heavy conversation, but that's an intense process. Keeping everybody's eyes on the prize, that we are here to accomplish the same thing, is very helpful. The other thing is the concept of change, right? So how
Yeah.
are we going to bring these two together? Both are going to have to change. There's no, we're bringing culture A in line with culture B. It's never going to happen. Culture B is always going to, on purpose or accidentally, shift to include culture A. So we have to make sure that we're being thoughtful about this and choosing what we're going to keep, what we're going to throw. The brain will register change as pain in human beings unless they feel that the outcome is going to be worth the pain. And then the brain will register it as excitement.
That's actually very interesting, I have to say. Change to the brain is pain unless it's indicated that the change is good, and thus the struggle is something that it indicates to the brain that the struggle is worth it. Which I guess is like obvious in one, in one sense, I would hope. But I'm hearing myself say it. I'm like, I sound almost like elementary or something. You know, when I hear it, but it's very true. There is so much consolidation going on in the hospitality business today, across restaurants, hotels, everything. And we talk a lot about great culture, and I tend to have conversations about culture under the guise of you're a growing business, like you're scaling net new. So your culture is starting from like, how do you like bring that culture to the next store and to the next, versus what's actually happening in a lot of the businesses I'm talking to is they're buying struggling assets to turn them around, do turnaround jobs, whichever, which obviously has a different cultural implication, in the sense that there are people who've worked there for 20 years and they've done it a certain way. People invested in businesses emotionally, spiritually, financially. And what are their sort of motivations and ambitions for what your plans are, which I find quite fascinating, especially when I think of change as pain, and how I think people hearing this podcast, because this is definitely the most intellectual conversation I've had on my podcast, like bar none. And you're really keeping me on my toes, and you're being very polite, saying my questions are great. Only because I'm like, this is the most active listening I've ever done. And also, I hate the phrase active listening, but this is the most active listening I've ever done, probably in my entire life, to keep up with you here. There's so much, in a great way, I should say. I'm on my best behavior. I'm like really.
Don't feel obligated to do that.
But we've talked a lot about leadership, and we've gone into a bit of culture. But I guess no better person to ask than you is, what's the point of culture?
When we're talking about the point of culture, I need you to help me out with that, because human beings have culture in order for us to be able to live with each other and survive. Like, it's a survival instinct. So when you say, what's the point of culture? Break that down.
Okay, so like, you're an organization. Why should you care about a company culture? If, in the sense that this actually could lead to a different kind of thing in my head, which is like, it's out like there's something about, say, over indexing on culture. I think like tech companies for the last 10 years are now in this sort of like reprisal phase, where they promised the world as a family and are now just like massive tech layoffs constantly, or like kind of the aspersions that have been cast on DE&I, for example, as a sort of like meta concept, as opposed to the actual practicality of implementing it. I feel like, why should a business, I'm only probing this question, I'm a big believer in culture, but I want to phrase it in a way that's like, why should somebody overly care about like designing a culture if their prerogative is to make money.
Here's the thing. Your culture's going to happen. There's no such thing as no culture. One thing, for better or for worse, human beings are storytellers, right? We're storytellers and we're social creatures. And so we're going to make up a story and we're going to behave in groups the way we want to behave. The question is, do you want to be in control of that story and in control of the way that people behave with each other? Or are you just going to let it go and hope? I find that typically people will make up a story based on the situation. And a lot of times it's not the story you want them to make up, right? Whenever we're talking about human beings in groups, ever, if we don't pay special attention to the relationships and curate them, then the result typically is not going to be functional.
Yeah.
People will.
Okay. It seems we've lost her for a second. She'll be back. She will be back.
Are you back?
Oh, it was you that dropped. I'm looking at
Did I drop? I'm back. All right.
Okay.
But what
I would
say
is
that.
no, you're fine. You were saying like the fundamental and you cut off at fundamental. So I guess not many people throw around the word fundamental at all. You can retrace your steps from there.
Shoot. What was I saying right before it? Maybe fundamental
We were
truth
saying
about
like
human being?
Yeah, you were like basically saying there's no such thing as an organization without culture because humans are storytellers and it's culture. And you're like the fundamental thing about
fundamental truth about human beings is that they're going to make up a story no matter what. And that story may or may not be what you want it to be. So if we don't curate culture, how are we going to make sure that everybody stays functional, right? Otherwise, when you don't curate that culture, each little work team will come up with its own little thing, and then you turn into silos. They don't work well together. So the important reason to curate culture is to ensure that your organization is scalable and effective and resilient. Those are the three places it comes up. Now, on a small scale, you can have a culture and you can just let it go and hope for the best and it's fine. But on a large, as the organization grows, that's just going to fall apart. The other thing that's really important is that, and it was part of the reason why DE and I got a bad name, is because we do a lot of checking the box and doing the activity, but we don't do the deep work. We don't dig into the culture when it's hard. We don't hold that VP accountable when they're being toxic because they're in a position of power. We don't go through and make sure that the pay is equitable when it is going to cost a lot of money. Like we don't make the sacrifice that we need to make. That's where you get that dichotomy of things like the tech world. My husband's in fintech startups as well. And I've seen cultures go well and I've seen them go poorly. And typically the ones that go poorly, all the culture efforts that go poorly is because they don't dig down to that really authentic, gut-wrenching level of sacrifice that it takes to really make sure that sometimes we're willing to sacrifice something in the business to be able to make something happen for the culture, right? Are you willing to fire a GM because they are talking to their people poorly when that organization and that hotel is doing well financially? Most people won't take it to that level, but that's the level it needs to get to.
That's awesome. That's not an awesome story, but it's an awesome insight, I should say.
I'm not saying we've done that, but I'm just saying that's the level of commitment that it really takes to get to the level of success that you see, like in all of the articles that are like saying, oh, our culture led to better business outcomes.
Yeah. Like that goes back to the phrase that I was thinking about, which is it's hard to describe it when you see it, like good culture. And I guess like that goes back to, oh my gosh, this could be a real Pandora's box of a question, but forgive me. But welcome to Narnia. Yeah, welcome to Narnia. I think because it's hard to describe, because I think like the way I look at it is, how can you put action against the words. So when you see a company mission statement, company values, like we stand for impact and we stand for action and we stand for love, and I'm reaming off my old companies ones, which I loved, but they were like words, and it was like, what are you doing for action and what are you doing for, say, impact or love? And I love them because they were short, and I hate all the wishy-washy ones. But the point I'm making is, how do you get people to buy into those? And the way I'm hearing you today is that it does stem from your leadership, which obviously makes sense because you want your leaders to live and breathe the mission and values of the organization. Because if you're not going to do it, then why should? It's almost, but that's the
If
point I made.
you
That's what I'm trying to
want
get
them
at.
to
Would
care,
somebody?
it's not, you don't tie it to the leadership. You don't tie it to the leadership. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If you really want somebody to take something seriously, you tie it to the food and water level, you tie it to their pay, and you tie it to their advancement. So if I really want somebody to take my mission, vision, values seriously, I'm going to define them, and I'm going to put that into a performance review. And I am going to pay based on their success in the performance review. And I am going to make them eligible for a promotion or an advancement or a better job based on that as well. So the last organization that I worked at was called Tang and Company. It was a family-run business, a very diverse portfolio of businesses. And that's exactly what we did. We had 6 behaviors that we felt defined like the Tang way. And we defined each one of them in terms of people's jobs. And that was the performance review. We also had usually 2 or 3 more like concrete goals, like making sure that like your scores were here and your stuff got in, all that kind of stuff. But that's how you do it. You tie it to the performance. It's got to be like the food, water, bread. If I have to behave a certain way to get a bonus, you better believe that's exactly what we're going to have. That is why American, do you remember the thing that happened with the Wells Fargo where people were like opening bank accounts for other people that didn't exist, right? Because they rewarded the behavior that actually went on, not the behavior that they wanted to see.
As I answered that, my dog was barking. So I apologize, listeners, for hearing, because that was actually really insightful.
He's agreeing with me.
Yeah. And it was she, because the he is mellow and she is not. But what I will say is, and that's true, like somebody on the podcast, and they're going to kill me when they hear this, but they made a really good point about this. It was like Google the Enron mission and values, and oh boy, did they live those. You know what I mean? Integrity, I think, was the number one. But what does it mean if it's not being lived? And to your point, it's about aligning the incentives of the employee against like your mission, your core mission and values. And I think that's a great little send off for this. The last question I always ask, Kelly, because I appreciate that we're at time and you're in a conference room clearly with people that are coming in and hearing all this.
I literally have a line outside my door right now, but they can wait.
Make them wait. Make them wait. Okay. Last question I ask everybody is, for a piece of advice you would give somebody listening to this podcast, given everything that you said, given that the audience are like peers and owners of hospitality businesses, what advice would you give them, given what you spoke about today?
Okay, it's not my advice. I'm going to pass along some advice by a really smart guy whose name is also Kelly. And he said, the solutions to your professional problem exist, but they do not lie in your field. They lie outside your field. So if you have a problem that you feel like is unsolvable, look to another field and see who else has solved it.
I actually enjoy that because that's effectively how I mentally operate too. So that's awesome. Kelly, this was something else, I have to say. I've enjoyed every second of hearing your philosophy and ideology, so to speak, relating to HR and people and leadership and culture. And actually, genuinely, I think they're so lucky to have you. I think you're like phenomenal at this. And I think more time in that organization, you're going to be a star. So thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
It was a wonderful conversation, Alex. Thank you so much. I love your questions. They were so in-depth, and I love the approach that you take to this. So thank you so much for having me on. It was lovely.
Awesome. How about that? There we go. Boom.